Do you worry that you're going to leave a bunch of analog orphans?
Documentation wasn't really available.
This sounds more like archaeology than computers.
If we're able to provide a bunch of value to the majority of the citizens and our users, that's a great place to start.
Welcome to the Functional Government Podcast. In 2016, Canadians bought and sold over $274 billion worth of real estate through the MLS system alone. That's just residential. It doesn't include commercial property, agricultural land, or the countless other transfers that happen every year. Inheritances, subdivisions, easements, even mining rights. All of those transactions have one thing in common. At some point, they pass through a provincial land titles office. In Alberta, the numbers are staggering. More than $50 billion in real estate moves through the province every year. That's $340 million a day flowing through a system that until recently was built on paper, fax machines, and processes so old that some of them weren't even documented anymore. And then COVID hit. When offices closed and staff couldn't access physical archives, Alberta's land title system didn't just slow down, it collapsed. By December 2022, a straightforward land title transfer that should have taken a week was taking 84 days. Surveys took nearly 3 months. Sales couldn't close, developers couldn't get financing, and $500 billion in private property was managed by a system that had fundamentally stopped working. The government's initial response was triage, throw bodies at the problem, hire temporary staff, keep the counter closed to the public so workers could focus on the backlog. And by late 2023, they dug out. Processing times dropped from 84 days back to just 10. But that's not modernization, that's just survival. The real work is what comes next, a $60 million effort to replace decades-old infrastructure with something that can actually handle what Albertans need. They're calling it ARLO, the Alberta Registries for Land Online. And it's not just about making the old process faster. It's about rethinking what title transfer should look like in a province where the economy runs on land. My guest today is Fouad Jallouli. Fouad leads service design for the Government of Alberta, a team of over 75 designers working to make government services actually work for citizens. He's here to walk us through how his team approaches problems like this, how you map a system so complex that parts of it exist only in the heads of people who've done it for decades, how you decide what to fix first, and how technology can help, but only if you start with the human experience. Hi, Fouad. How are you doing?
Good. How are you, Alistair?
I'm doing very well. We have so many things I want to talk to you about. Today, we're going to focus on one of them, which is land and title transfer. But before we dive in, can you tell folks who you are and what you work on and why you are an interesting person to learn from about government modernization?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Fouad Jallouli. I'm the Director of Service Design at the Government of Alberta. And so really I'm responsible for a bunch of the human-centered design practice within government, which really means how we design services for citizens, taking their needs into context. So the idea is that we go out there, we talk to citizens, we understand what people need to do, as well as what government employees need to do to be able to serve our citizens, and then create services around that. So I manage a large team of designers who work on projects and products all across government.
Awesome. And human-centric design. Why do you need to say human-centric when you talk about design?
Well, I think it's really important to understand that at the end of the day, government is here to support humans and support citizens, right? And so we really need to understand a little bit about what our unique demographics require within the province of Alberta, as an example, what kind of communities we need to serve, what type of services that they need to access when they're interacting with government, and how we're able to create kind of fair and equitable access to services. With that means that we need to go out and speak to a lot of humans of all kind of walks of life and age groups and demographics. And you can imagine a large spread of urban and rural as well. And so when we say human-centered design, we really mean going out to try to understand representatively what the citizens need across Alberta.
We spoke to Lisa Fast, who's a designer with a degree in computer psychology, who actually worked for Nortel designing payphones at the start of her career. And she was telling us some really surprising stories about what happens when you actually go talk to a human instead of assuming things. Is there anything that you've been surprised by when you've gone out and actually done the feet on the ground kind of research where you had a big assumption and then you met the person, you're like, my entire model of this was wrong.
Yeah, I have a kind of a really great example. Earlier in my career, when I did some work within the justice system, I spent some time working within family court. And some of the initial research that I had done around how people interact with family court was radically different than what the courts thought that people interacted with them actually did. Something as simple as language when it comes to interacting with government is very, very important, specifically legal language. And so an interesting learning was when we went out there and started talking to folks who were going to mediation or families who were getting ready to go into court, they didn't even understand what exactly the process was to go to court or to resolve their issue, whether it's amicably or not. And so a lot of time and thought was spent around how do we best understand and explain the process of the courts to people, so they can actually interact with the court system in a meaningful way. And so language is just a great example of something that is often surprising, the level of language required.
Yeah, Lisa was mentioning that one of the real skills for being a human-centered designer is humility, like accepting that you don't know what you don't know. So I'm going to use this awkward segue to slide into talking about a very humble government service, something we haven't touched on before. Land and title transfer. This is a pretty mundane, paperwork-heavy process, and it's obviously something that people may not think a lot about. Land titles may seem obscure, but it's like $50 billion a year in real estate transactions flowing through provincial systems. Do you have an idea of like how many transfers happen annually within Alberta, what they cost, how long they take? Like where is that? Where is the problem now?
Yeah, that's a great question, Alistair. So there's tens of thousands of land title transfers that happen, and these are a kind of a broad array of different types of transfer types. So these are everything from land titles to corporate titles to surveys on land, joint ventures, mineral rights, and organizations that actually work on extracting resources. And so there are many, many types of land title transfers. And this problem really manifested itself quite heavily within COVID. There was a huge backlog of people getting land and title transfers done because it was a paper process. And so typically in Alberta, when someone goes and initiates a land title transfer, it's a paper process that goes through a lawyer, and then a lawyer submits that to the land titles office. And I think that backlog, if I remember correctly, had reached about 8 months within COVID.
Wow.
Which had caused a massive problem in terms of people not being able to move titles quickly. And that would make it even worse in scenarios where there would actually be natural turnover, when people need to change titles more often than that on the same piece of property. So you can imagine the Government of Alberta had decided to go and do a very large modernization initiative around this to be able to tackle that problem.
So it's already a slow problem if you have to use a lawyer and do paper. But when that gets to 8 months, now you're waiting 8 months to be able to build your house, or waiting 8 months to be able to move in somewhere. And presumably that cascades because there's someone behind you that's also waiting for that to happen. So what was the public reaction to that kind of backlog?
Well, I think initially there was a lot of people upset when it came, especially within the commercial real estate space. A lot of land development, housing development, they really relied on quick transfers to be able to get work done, and then of course sell that property to their end users. So there was a lot of kind of initial public backlash, and then of course just a general never-ending worklog for the public sector employees responsible for dealing with that problem. It was kind of like they could just never catch up, right, over time. And so they had initially initiated some aspects of the work to be able to address the backlog quickly, but quickly realize that they need to rethink how land titles actually needs to process from a digital perspective.
Yeah, I think that's one of the lessons that really stuck out from our conversation with Lisa earlier, is that digital is not just about taking an analog process and digitizing it. It's about reconsidering what's possible now that you're using bits and online systems and so on, instead of just sort of taking the existing physical process and putting it online. Before we get into mapping out the process and how you changed it, can you walk me through what a property transfer actually looked like, the steps, the documents? In some of my research for this, I came across weird acronyms like SPIN2 and ALTO. There's paper documents, signatures, faxes, registry offices. So give me an example of what this is actually like for someone.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, typically it starts with a paper document. When someone closes on a piece of property, that document goes to a lawyer. That lawyer then submits a land title search request for that piece of property. They then get that request, and then they're able to then submit a application to change the land title, which is a paper document that goes to land titles offices in the major cities. Once that is done, they get a confirmation. So that process takes quite a bit of time. There are many systems involved. So you had mentioned something like Spin2. So that was an internal system where also provided some access to some end users, like commercial developers out of the market. But ultimately, it was more of like a one-way reporting tool. So you could do your land title search, but you still had to go ahead and move forward on the process of submitting a land title switch application. And then once that paper was done and someone looked at it, they had to do some manual data entry within the internal system also to be able to get that inputted. And then they had to create a exit document that allowed them to fax it back to whoever had requested.
So they're taking a thing that you've filled, a piece of paper that someone's filled in, they're taking that paper and typing it into a system and then faxing it back to someone who's then going to transcribe it again.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
So it's several times it's going through a human who might make a mistake or get it wrong, who's got to, process that thing. But are they adding information to it, or are they just kind of approving it and moving to the next step?
Yeah. So sometimes there would be missing information, or information would be unclear. So they would have to have some internal processes in place to be able to check on that information. So they have to go back, look at the actual land title registries. Maybe they have to go down and look at the actual deeds, the copies of the physical.
They have to go to the physical office where this is in some city and go and look at a piece of paper.
That's right. That might happen if the information isn't clear or a title is being contested, right? So if people don't agree, or, there is someone who's raising objection for a title movement, or, an example could be like there's a lien on a title and someone wants to dispute that lien, saying, well,
do you have an idea of how many titles are contested?
I don't have a clear number on the titles. I do know roughly there is about 117 title types that you can request from a land title perspective, and about 37 types of land surface. So there is a lot of complexity around the information required for the right thing.
I guess when I looked at the passport thing, for tax filing, most Canadians could file automatically. For passports, most people renewing an application who live in Canada should just be able to renew. So for many of these things, the exceptions are a very small amount of the total volume, but they're the parts that, because of the exceptions, everything needs to be looked at by a human. Is that a fair statement here?
Yeah, 100%, right? Pretty much as soon as you veer off, we'll call it the happy path of doing a basic land title transfer, it requires some form of analysis by a human, right? To ensure that the information is correct, or understand someone's point of view, or communicate with various parties in the transfer to be able to have a conversation around that. So 100%.
John Savage, who talked to us about Irish passport modernization, used the term happy path a lot. Is that a designer term?
Yeah, it's funny. I don't know. I think it is a designer term. We use it all the time. Happy path, just to define that really quickly, would be what we expect a good user experience to look like. So kind of like the most frequent way somebody would interact with a service or a product and getting the expected outcome. We call that the happy path. And then, a good designer, or, someone working within digital transformation, they really need to think about all of the unhappy paths as well.
So when you started looking at this, you were mapping out all the paths. You had to map out the whole process and understand this stuff. So walk me through your process for understanding the various paths and what surprised you when you laid the whole thing out.
Yeah, there was kind of like three major initiatives that had to happen when you looked at something like a legacy system this complex. First of them was really to begin to think about the existing workflows, what we consider the business logic within the system. And so that was really kind of discovered through workshopping with folks who are actually administrating the system. Because it's so old and it's a legacy system, documentation wasn't really available. And so that they had to spend some time shadowing staff to understand how they actually use the system from a day-to-day perspective.
Literally just following someone around and taking notes about what they're doing to reverse engineer the documentation. This sounds more like archaeology than computers.
Yeah, it is a lot like ethnography for sure. And so, and then of course they also had to analyze the actual source code. So what they had done within this legacy system was begin to figure out, okay, what is this business logic and the business rules? And so one of the big things that came out of that was, due to this lack of comprehensive documentation, many of the processes just existed in people's heads, as well as obviously in some outdated training manuals from 2004 or something like that, right? And so that was something that could only be discovered by like mentioned, shadowing and really working with the people who are administering and using the system, as well as understanding what the users are doing. So that also applies to how people actually were requesting land titles and understanding their workflow as well. So that's really typically how we start that.
I want to break down where the improvements came from. Starting with the process redesign, where were there steps that once you looked at them could be done in parallel instead of sequentially, or things that were just like waiting for no reason?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So when we started looking at the solution for this modernization problem, we really had to split it into two pieces. Piece number one was continue to help them digitize the low-hanging fruit. So there was a bunch of these land title requests. We had to help them with their COVID backlog and get that completed. But we also began to work in parallel, rethinking what a new land title system could look like. And so that's kind of where the genesis of the new project ended up happening. And so, when we start to rethink the intake of how people are requesting land titles, that was kind of really one of the key indicators of how we can improve the overall system from a user experience perspective.
It does seem like something where each time a piece of land changes title or changes owner, that's an opportunity for you to digitize the content. Like, you're not going to sit down and go through every piece of land all at once and put them all in there. You could go, well, when this house comes up for sale, that's a good opportunity for us to take all the stuff that's on paper, pull that file and make a digital record of it. But that means it's going to take 50 years. And sometimes you're going to have to go back to the paper record for pieces of land that haven't changed, or properties that haven't changed title. So, it's not like you can suddenly spend a lot of money and ingest everything. Did your approach to this modernize each piece of land as it sort of went through the system, or did you have other strategies?
One of the benefits of running in parallel was us to be able to provide kind of like a new service to any new land title requirements and requests coming in, while still being able to serve clients who were in the old system, right? And so the way that they had done it was they had begun to roll out the land titles tool, the new one, to a set of pilot users.
And what's the land titles tool do? What is that?
So that is like the lookup and search tool that allows you to initiate the kind of the easiest or low-hanging fruit type of requests for land title transfer. So the idea was that it's like a staged rollout. People would begin to be able to access the tool online in a fully digital way to do, the most important happy path or the easiest happy path scenarios.
And that was just for certain types of land?
That's right. For certain residential land title moves. And so kind of the most basic version of a land title move.
So you're picking like the 80-20 rule. And this is the same thing Lisa was doing. Renewed applications from adults is the easiest thing to do for passports. So there are critics in government who say you can't deploy something until you're serving everyone. And you've probably heard that before. Here you're saying, well, we're going to bite off the easy part and let the humans deal with the outside cases, because there will always be those unhappy paths. What are your thoughts about picking the low-hanging fruit?
Yeah, I'm a firm believer of the 80-20 rule, like you had mentioned. So the idea is that 80% of the value comes from focusing on the highest volume or highest transaction level activities that we can do. And so that very much applies. And if we're able to provide a bunch of value to the majority of the citizens and our users, then I think that's a great place to start. So often in our work, we try to identify the highest transaction volumes with the lowest complexity to allow us to be able to get value as quickly as possible. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, these are investments that require quite a bit of money and time and resources to modernize. So it makes sense that we try to get to something that provides value.
Do you worry that you're going to leave a bunch of analog orphans for the people who are the edge cases and the exceptions, who are going to be forced to deal with a harder process while the most common, government's supposed to serve everyone. So do you have concerns about that, or are you okay with that?
No, I think what is really important is to understand that ultimately when citizens interact with government, it is a multi-channel experience, which means they're always going to interact with government in many ways. And we need to give people who maybe don't have the best digital literacy other ways to interact with government. There will always be a scenario where we will need maybe some paper, or we may need a person to talk to another person at a registry's office or at a land titles building. Those will always continue to exist. But what we are trying to do is trying to reduce the work and reduce the cost and improve efficiency for the things that can be digitized as best as possible. And so we always have to continually be working on on those edge cases while we are improving kind of like the major aspects of a service.
Yeah, John Savage mentioned in the passport case in Ireland, because they'd freed up so many kiosks, because they now had scheduling and so on, they left 2 kiosks for people who needed to actually do it in person and weren't able to use digital, and they'd actually freed up resources so those people could get served much faster rather than standing in line with hundreds of other people who could do the digital version. So I guess as long as you use some of that money to make the services better for those that have to go through another channel and use the analog thing, it makes a lot of sense. One of the things that we've seen often with passport modernization, with tax modernization and so on, is it's not enough to simplify the process. You have to actually go change the policies. For example, in passports, there's this idea that the photo that you take, you're not allowed to smile too much, has to be taken with a specific lens that Photoshops actually pay money for. And so you would have to pass legislation to make it acceptable to use a photo taken with your phone that conforms to the biometrics that we use. And that's a policy change. You need to go back to legislators and say, we're not going to change the legislation. When you were trying to modernize title transfer, did you need to change the rules themselves? Were there documentation requirements or like procedural mandates that were remnants of paper and could be relaxed?
Thankfully for this project, we didn't have to pass any new legislation. There was enough kind of breathing room within the legislation to be able to focus on just relaxing the requirements around specifically digital document signing. That's always kind of one of the big hurdles within government, is the wet signature versus the digital signature. And so they were able to just kind of get approval to be able to move that forward, which of course comes with all sorts of benefits, right? Speed to deliver, the ability to do that online, reduction in error, ensuring that the right people are signing the right documents. Things are timestamped and tracked, and so we have a clear understanding of how long it's taking us to work through this process as we move forward. So luckily, we didn't have to do too many changes from a legislative perspective, but we did have to work on our internal process, so operational policy, in terms of relaxing the requirements around digital signing.
Since you bring it up, you can't fix what you can't measure. And in your case, a lot of paper processes sitting in offices, people driving to a big city to look at a record and stuff. Humans don't tend to be very good at documenting how long it took them to do something, but software has no choice but to do so. Everything's got a timestamp. Did you find that you got additional visibility into the process by digitizing things?
Yeah, I think there were a couple of key metrics that were really important when it came to this work. One of them was the time for registration. So how long did it take someone to be able to use the system and be able to interact with it and submit the request, how long it took for folks to submit that claim and then have it being viewed by somebody, and then how long it took for staff to process that. So what it took from a title perspective to be able to do the data entry required to get that done, and then finally what it took to get people's response back. So the kind of the average response time required for that land title move. Those were really the big things that were tracked when it came to, or were beginning to become tracked when we began to digitize the process. Often within a paper process, it's very difficult to measure that, whether how many applications people look at every day, and then what actually gets processed, how long things sit in a mail slot or in a mailbox. It's very difficult to measure. So one of the benefits of digitization is allowing folks to be able to track that and then be able to correlate that with salary costs of public sector employees to ensure that they understand how much it's costing them to be able to do this type of work.
So I want to make sure I understand what's happened here so far. You've got a process that was very analog, that involved visits to land registry libraries or archives. You're using a lawyer, you're forwarding things to someone who then has to type it in, and then they're verifying stuff and they're faxing it and so on. The majority of the land title transfers can take the happy path, as you call it. And so you found a way to improve the process by following people around and examining the code and doing archaeology or digital ethnography to figure out what the process was. And now your first optimization was to take the system that let people look up land title transfers, and presumably if they're logged in with the right authentication, to be able to initiate a land title transfer. And that's just a button that says, I want to transfer this. What else did you do in that first iteration?
That was a big step in its own, just to be able to get to a place where we could do that in a way that made sense for the initial users in the most kind of common use cases. And this is like an ongoing multi-year project, so we're still in the middle of it. And so, like any good project, we're trying to avoid the concept of trying to do too many things all at one time. And so currently, as we speak, there are multiple teams, about 8 teams, looking at what the next opportunity areas look like. Things like AI usage in terms of being able to scan and understand documentation, being able to pull out or fill out incomplete or missing information based on imaging that comes in with these titles. So I think there's going to be a whole wave of AI usage and AI innovation within government, just digitizing things that before would be highly unreliable, having a better sense. So I would say that there are many, many opportunities to look at, and it will be worked on kind of over the next coming years. But their initial goal was to really try to get a very good initial user experience in the tool. And we're continuing to work with the teams around that user experience and ensuring that they're able to create something of value to the most common use cases first.
So yeah, it sounds like you identified an existing system that could be augmented by adding a button that says, I'd like to transfer this, please, which sounds trivial, but there's a lot of moving parts behind that. Like, you don't want people to be able to trigger spurious land transfers. You need to know where it goes and so on. And then, you've identified the happy path, the most common things to pilot this on. And as that works and you identify the issues, you can then add other cases, other types of land. So it seems like you have a pretty clear roadmap. You kind of anticipated my next question, which was going to be about technology as an enabler. You mentioned AI for things like document parsing, maybe better identity verification. What do you think is going to be possible that wasn't possible when the original system was built?
I think when it comes to modernizing systems from a digital perspective, I think it's really important for us to think about how we can do it in a modular way. And so the idea is that if we're able to create hooks or the ability to be able to pull information in and out of these systems in a smaller way, it allows us to create kind of new services and new products on top of these systems. So when we're talking about legacy systems in the past, it was very difficult to improve them and make them better. It would be very expensive and it would be a really big initiative. But the way that digital products are being created today, it allows us a more granular ability to do more and pull information in and out of these systems. And I envision that we will be able to use this information to provide better and more enhanced services for citizens in the future because we have access to it in a lot easier way.
These are like building blocks, as I understand it. Like you mentioned,
Right.
Simply being able to go accept digital signatures because the legislation didn't explicitly prohibit it. And now everything can be signed digitally. And you could have a similar service that's like, click here to pay. And once payment works, everyone gets payment. We've had conversations over the years about this kind of modular building block approach for things like notifications and forms and components that you can build new services out of. But when I talk to people about the old legacy systems, they're never built that way. We were speaking with someone in the Marine group at Transport Canada who said that an inspector has to log into 20 different parallel systems because each of those systems was built as a standalone thing that was like procured in isolation. How much of your work dealing with these legacy systems is a result of how procurement used to happen?
I would say a significant portion would be related to how we used to procure services. In the past, we would be kind of procuring what we call a turnkey solution and the support of a big system right from typically one vendor or one company. And that would be like a multi-year, kind of very large Big Bang approach to getting something, right? And so you can imagine with that by the time we get the thing that we ordered, everything's already changed. What we need has changed. Our requirements have changed internally inside government. Legislation has changed or policy has changed. With a new approach within government, really on this kind of more like, I will call it agile and kind of iterative process in building software, really allows us to be more responsive to citizens and their needs, as well as staff and the pressures that they have as well, right? And so, we're using tools like AI and kind of development from that perspective, as well as general kind of product and digital techniques to be able to build tools and products faster in a more iterative way for citizens, and then going out and actually releasing them. So we want to go out and test them with users. We want to actually release that functionality and then build on that as we move forward. So very much a move to an iterative approach as opposed to kind of like a big multi-year thing.
It feels like there's a lot to unpack there in terms of vendor procurement processes, because if you buy something from a particular vendor and build a system that way, then if you want other things you build to talk to it, you still have to buy them and build them on the same vendor's platform. And the alternative obviously is to build everything as microservices using open source, but then you need to staff up for internal development of open source. How much time did you spend talking to vendors to get the solution working versus how much did you build on completely portable things? So it's okay if it runs on a particular vendor, but like something that you could take the code and the content and the data and move it somewhere else and it would still work.
Our deputy minister has really been putting a lot of emphasis on the movement away from legacy systems that are kind of locked into one space and moving towards a modular microservices-based approach when it comes to creating new products and services within governments.
Can you explain for the muggles what microservices mean?
Yeah, so essentially just having the ability to create things in pieces with around a given technology and then able to interact with that system kind of in various ways, where we don't have to create kind of one legacy system or one very large system that doesn't allow us to communicate effectively with it and pull information out of it. So it's just an architecture to allow us to be able to talk to technologies easier.
Build smaller building blocks and then get them to talk to one another instead of building one finished structure, right? So, it's great that you've identified that as a problem, because this seems to be, if governments aren't looking out for this stuff, we'll just get ourselves into yet another legacy system where we're captive in one particular architecture. How does Alberta compare now? Are there provinces or countries that are doing title transfer better that you're trying to learn from? Are you leading in land registry modernization? Where do you get your inspiration? Who do you hold yourself up to?
I think we're among the leaders in the world, from my understanding. Based on the work that's been done, we are leading the way in a lot of this work. I think the investment that the Registries Modernization Office is leading within land titles is significant and among the largest investments in this space within the broader context of Canada. So this is a part of a broader Registries Modernization initiative that's looking at not only land titles, but motor vehicles and other pieces. And so there's been significant investment and resources put towards land titles and other things. And so I definitely think that we are leading the space within Canada for sure.
What are your KPIs for the land title system now? You mentioned that you've got some data on them. And are you making those KPIs public? How does an Albertan know if this service is getting better or worse?
That's a great question. We've begun to think about explicitly how we're going to communicate. What does good service delivery look like when it comes to the public? But like I mentioned, there was kind of major KPIs around the turnaround time required for applications, how long it takes for people to be able to get the result that they're looking for, things like availability and uptime and response time when it comes to the request being fulfilled are kind of the major metrics that we're tracking internally. And there's going to be some thoughts, I'm sure there's more thoughts around what else we could be tracking, especially as we continue to build out our use cases, right? So as I mentioned, we started with something smaller, but a high volume scenario. And as we continue to build on that, we'll be able to continue to think about what type of outcomes we want to measure and communicate publicly.
It really does seem like a lot of governments build great things and then fail to, they don't finish it by telling people what they've done. And so there's less appreciation for the fact that things are getting better. And that just undermines trust in government. So I'm glad to see that you're trying to form baselines and track this stuff for sure. I want to kind of wrap up here by understanding a few things. And there's obviously tons of other topics that you've worked on that I would love to hear about maybe we can do other calls on that, around the work you've done on single sign-on and benefits modernization. But what I want to understand here is if a service designer in another province or at the federal level is listening to this, or a citizen is listening to this and says, I want my government to do this, what's your advice? Where do they start?
I think if you are working within the public sector, I think the first area would be to go out and reach out to your colleagues and peers across the country. There are many, many smart people working on many amazing and great initiatives. And I think people, like citizens in general, would benefit from understanding how passionate people are when they're talking about working within government. I mean, many of us public servants, we work in government because we want to provide great services in the communities that we live and work, right? And so one of the big drivers for me as example, is being able to give back to Alberta and citizens. And so we really do care about how government serves people. And it's like anything else, right? It takes a lot of work and a lot of intentional effort and thought to be able to do things right and serve such diverse communities within our populations. And so I would say there are people who really do care, and there are many people who are working on a lot of innovative things. And I think government can do a better job of communicating publicly what we work on, but a lot gets done behind the scenes that maybe people don't really realize.
When a lot of people think about whether government is doing good work, they compare it to the private sector. But of course, a for-profit company can like end of life an old product and then, sorry, that product doesn't work anymore. Or it can make a product that only serves a lucrative target market, or it can update the entire product. And if the customers complain, tough luck. There are companies that move from software licenses to monthly payment. Private sector companies have a lot more latitude in what they can get away with, if you will, or change in order not to get trapped in the past. But it seems like government is doomed to get trapped in the past because it must provide continuous services to everyone.
Yeah, and I think that's always going to be the balance, is that the government is such a long-standing institution within our country and has to actually apply has to actually provide services to everybody, all citizens in our jurisdiction. And so that means that stability is very important when it comes to how things get done. So there's like a delicate balance between how innovative government can be. Like, the private sector is very innovative when it comes to creating new business models and, new products and services for new customers. Government has to balance this idea of innovation with consistency, right? At the end of the day, the citizens need to come to government to do many, many things. And so for them to be able to do that, the government has to be able to deliver in a consistent way. And so we have to really often balance these more traditional processes with rethinking how they could look like in a digital sphere, while also trying to make things as simple as possible for citizens. And so that's kind of one point I want to touch on, is the future of this work is simplicity, right? And we want to make things very simple as possible to interact with government. I think like that is, in my opinion, one of the ultimate goals.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing when we speak to people from other countries in and out of government who actually think their government is awesome. And there's no reason it can't be awesome, but it seems like partly because of political polarization. I mean, the news that has come out about the number of anti-Canadian political party accounts that are actually based in like Lagos or Eastern Europe, and people with 80,000 followers who have been criticizing prominent Canadian political parties turn out to be bots from other parts of the world trying to sow polarization and disinformation. It seems like this is not a time where people can understand and have empathy for what's going on in government. In fact, many people I talk to don't understand the difference between an elected official who is chosen by voters and a public servant who is an employee of the citizens. What do you wish the average person understood about the work that you do and the struggles that public servants face to deliver effective digital services?
I would say that I think the first step would be to understand that the public sector is made up of passionate individuals who are really interested in providing impact and working within the communities and serving the communities that they live in. Whatever you may see on the political scale of things, that isn't the public service, right? Those are important, as our representative democracy allows us to coalesce the needs of our constituents at that level. But there is always work being done to improve the lives of citizens, whether it's things from land titles or childcare subsidies to improvements in the justice system to senior services, folks who are working on senior services modernization. There's a lot of public sector folks doing a really hard job across a lot of different things, a lot of different areas within government. And I think supporting your local public sector workers and giving them the empathy, when you're interacting with a person at a registry office or somebody at a Alberta Works office, it's really important to understand that those people are there to serve the community, and they're there because they love their jobs and they love serving the communities. I think that's really important, that we want to have empathy for everybody, kind of both ways.
So you obviously have a pretty broad mandate as the Director of Service Design with a focus on human-centered service design. You've worked on benefits modernization, single sign-on, digital ID, land and title transfer. We're going to talk to you about all those things, hopefully. But I guess I want to close this episode by asking you about what in technology makes you hopeful. Because we live in this time of tremendous technological change. It's only in the last 10 years that we could reliably assume most citizens had a device on their phone, and that phone had multiple biometric systems and was relatively secure, and that people knew how to use it, and they had an email address, all the other things that sort of make it the reality. It is now the default that people have a digital connection and a digital device that we can reasonably trust with multi-factor authentication. More recently, obviously, we got generative AI that's changing our ability to interact with systems in plain language. What makes you hopeful about government's going to get better in Canada? Because we were number 3 in the world in 2010, number 47 last year. Other people keep getting better. What makes you hopeful that we can catch up?
What makes me hopeful is the great investment that I think all the governments within Canada have begun to initiate and really begin to realize when it comes to buying into this concept of improving citizen services through a human-centric way. So what I mean is that many governments and jurisdictions have really begun to embrace the idea of talking to citizens and users, and then figuring out where technologies like AI really get the most bang for the buck. So like I had mentioned earlier, our ministry has a very strong mandate to utilize AI. Our deputy minister is very bullish on AI, and finding all of the use cases when it comes to the areas where AI can accelerate how we deliver services to citizens, I think is the key, right? So finding the best use cases and utilizing technology in the places where technology is amazing, but still understanding that at the end of the day, there is a human at the other end of the conversation. And so we need to have a human feel and a human touch to the vast majority of the services that we provide to citizens. So this idea of just getting better at understanding where technology can accelerate us, cut costs, improve our efficiency, and ultimately improve the human experience.
Awesome. Well, it sounds like a great place to end this. Fouad, thank you so much for spending time with us. I know you've got a lot of work to do, and hopefully we can chat about some of the other things you're working on in coming episodes.
Thanks so much, Alistair.
Thanks for joining us on the Functional Government Podcast.